This video is brought to you by BizWire TV, where your news is made.
Chris, you're speaking on a panel later at the conference on corporate governance. In terms of corporate governance and the role of IR, how is that situation evolving at the moment?
Tim, over the last 3 to 5 years, we've really seen a growth in responsibility with the IRO in terms of corporate governance, really in collaboration with the corporate secretary and the general counsel's team. And really the way we look at it, I think, is a few of the issues that have come to the fore as it relates to corporate governance are say on pay and proxy access, probably the number one and number two issues as it relates to governance. And think about that. Who does say on pay impact? The CEO, the CFO. Who does proxy access impact? The board of directors. And so the importance of governance has really been elevated in the C-suite, and it's been elevated at the board level. And what that has meant is that the IRO, therefore, really has to become part of the team that addresses governance, not just at the time of the annual general meeting of shareholders, but throughout the year.
You mentioned proxy access. A huge story last year. What's the sort of state of play with proxy access at the moment? Is it continuing to be rolled out company by company?
Well, it is, and if you look at the S&P 500, I think there's 125 companies who now have proxy access. But it still hasn't been put into practice. I don't think there's been, and actually I know there's not been a group of shareholders who has put a nominee on the slate of directors. Ultimately, it's going to happen at some point, but companies are now addressing it, working with shareholders. And New York City has been a big proponent of proxy access, and so you see the support for proxy access and the deployment of proxy access growing dramatically in companies.
As you said, it's a bit of a nuclear option, but it could happen at some point for one company.
It's got to happen. I think it's inevitable.
And changing topic now to executive pay. There's been a few stories in the UK, particularly at the moment, about how institutional investors are making a lot of noise about executive pay, but then when it comes to how they actually vote, they're very strong backers of management. I wonder what your insight is on that.
Well, if you look at it, most say on pay proposals if you stand back, we'll get majority approval. The issue comes is when ISS now has said you need 70% minimum shareholder approval for us to back you going forward. So the bar of shareholder approval has really been raised by the proxy advisory firms, so it's going to remain an issue going forward. And yes, not every shareholder will line up, but as it relates to pay per performance and total shareholder return, say on pay is one area where shareholders really could vote and make their voices be heard.
Okay, and maybe one final question. You just mentioned proxy advisors. We hear from companies that sometimes they find it difficult to engage with them. They find it hard to work out how they come up with their recommendations. Sometimes they don't get responses for them. Have you got any advice for IROs that want to engage better with proxy advisors?
I'd say rule number one is don't wait for the report to be issued by the proxy advisory firm. Get in front of it off season, go and meet with them, explain the way you're organized, explain your approach to governance, explain your approach to compensation. Really is critical. Once you're in the season, once the reports have been issued, it's pretty much too late at that point. You could certainly go back and correct any factual errors with them, but it's going to be tough to influence them once they've written their recommendation.